Hey channel, this is SkyFi Audio coming at you from Glen Rock, New Jersey. Today we've got a trio of well-tempered turntables. These came out in the 1980s. This is the original version or the earlier version. And it was quite revolutionary. Pretty simple in design, yet it had some amazing features that really haven't been surpassed since this came out. A lot of these turntables sold in our local market, so we come across them somewhat often, and we've got three sitting here waiting for some love and some restoration work, which we like to do on these tables. We've gotten pretty familiar with them, and we usually wait to amass more than two or so before we work on them. These don't need much work, just a little tweaking here and there, some fluids, an oil change, suspension alignment, much like a car. So I thought I'd go through some of the features and what makes these turntables so unique, and tell you about the good things and the bad things about them, and why we tend to favor these turntables. They have two pieces of pretty interesting technology. It's simple, but really neat in execution. One is the way the bearing works on the platter, and I'll take one apart and show you what that looks like. And secondly, the way the arm is suspended. It's pretty unique. It's suspended by a pair of fishing strings, and it hangs while suspended on a bath of silicone, very high viscosity silicone. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that works and how you adjust it. The rest of the platters or the turntable is fairly simple. It's got a three plinth design. These are high density boards that are glued together. And the primary differences between the three models, the first and second here, I think are identical, probably about the same production run. The third one's a little bit later. As you can see, these have a cutout for the motor goes. Here's one where the motor isn't in place. So the motor, interestingly, sits on its own sort of base. It's a very heavy, it's got to be more than 10-15 pounds, and it doesn't touch the turntable anywhere. You can see here it sits on the table on its own, and it's perfectly acoustically isolated from the rest of the turntable. The only thing connecting it to the turntable is the belt itself, which is highly engineered, very small and lightweight. So the power for the turntable is right here. It doesn't have a lot of torque, but it does have enough so you can use a pretty nice record weight if you'd like to. And then your speed adjustments are here just by lowering the belt into the 45 position. Let me do that again. That's how we do the speed alignment. There's no facilities for 78 RPMs. But that's it. It's a synchronous motor. It runs on essentially the 60 hertz you get from your electrical supply. And we've put all sorts of measuring equipment on it, flutters, and it tests really well. So we've really never found the need to mess with these motors or even provide upgrades like we do on other turntables. So I was talking about the motor. The motor sits in this cutout here, isolated from the table. And if you see on the slightly later version of the turntable, the motor sits within a round cup. Same thing, it's just a different mounting style. It also sits on the table itself, on the surface of the table. It does not touch the turntable in any way. So really we have no preference of one over the other. Other features include some really neat ways of adjusting the arm, which is removable for shipping. The arm sits on a post essentially, and this is the adjustment. You essentially loosen this nut right here, this finger nut, and you can adjust the height of the tone arm pretty simply. I'll show it to you on maybe this one over here. So no tools necessary. You essentially just loosen this up, and now you've got the ability to raise and lower the tone arm. So for transport, it makes it really nice. You pretty much just remove the RCA mounting interface here for the tone arm cables, and you remove the two screws from the back of this, and now you've got essentially the tone arm connected to this piece separated from the turntable, and that gets packaged separately. All right, let's have a closer look at some of the adjustment features. Besides the height of the tone arm, One thing that's notable is its ability to adjust the azimuth angle on the fly. So if you've noticed in a close-up that there's a disc, a white disc that sits within the dampened fluid, and it hangs from two fishing wires, one here and one there. And these two knobs here allow you to essentially, well, this one allows you to essentially raise one side of this cup. You can kind of see it as I turn here. You can see it react to my turning. It's a pretty slow reaction. Now, it's a very viscous fluid, so everything you do to this tone arm takes about a second or two for it to settle and react, which is why it sounds so amazing. The other adjustment is this nut here, which essentially changes the geometry between, it opens and closes this little top clamp, and it changes the geometry as to where the strings attach, and that allows you also adjustments. I believe you can affect the anti-skate by doing so. All right, the other final adjustment is fairly simple. It's just the counterweight here for the tracking force. So as I said before, tweaking this turntable is a bit of a challenge just because you have to be patient. There's nothing sophisticated about it, but things don't react immediately. So you kind of have to make a slight change, wait a little bit, see how it affects the geometry, and then wait a bit before you make the next adjustment. If you start turning knobs and making adjustments really quickly, you're gonna probably get lost. Let me show you what this would look like with a record in place, or what it feels like. So I've got one here. We would normally have a mat below this, but this is just a test record that we've got around the shop. Okay. The first thing you'll notice is that there isn't a lifting mechanism. There's no facilities for lowering and lifting the tone arm. You pretty much just have to do it by hand. And you can immediately see how interesting it is, how it reacts. It's almost like it's in a zero gravity environment. So here it is playing. I don't have this connected to anything, but I thought I'd show you what the azimuth adjustment is like. So you can see here the turn arm changing angles on the fly. And as far as I'm concerned, this is probably the only turn arm I've seen that you can actually adjust azimuth while the record's playing, which makes this pretty convenient. On a lot of turntables, you've got to sort of stop playing the record, make adjustments, and then listen for the desired effect. So let me put it back in its holding place. And again, very elegant, simple holding mechanism that doesn't seem to break, which is just two pieces of aluminum with plastic set screws. So this is your final resting position. And then this particular arm is adjustable to its position, whether you want it a little further in and out from the turntable, just by loosening a set screw that's in here. You can also be rotated on its own spot just by loosening the same post that we used to lift and lower. You can kind of change the geometry and the position, effective length of the tone arm by turning it, because it does pivot within one of its sides. It doesn't pivot from its center axis. So that when you set up a protractor to try to align the cartridge, this is something you have to keep in mind to make sure that you are in the right position. All right, let's talk about the other innovation with this turntable, which is its center bearing. Here I've got this late model version, which differs slightly from the earlier ones. We noticed this lower spindle is much larger than what comes on the earlier version, but the bearing design is virtually the same, and I'll show you inside. So this sits also in a cup of fluid, a lubricant that comes with the table. This one's quite dirty, so we'll make sure we replace it. But as you can see here, it's not a conventional bearing. It's essentially a triangular bearing with a couple of Teflon surfaces. You can see two of them right here. So the spindle or the drive sits within this cup and is held in place by pressure from the belt, the drive belt. So if you can picture the motor here and the belt going around, the belt's elasticity is going to push this bearing in this direction, right? And it's going to push it up against the bearings, along with a third bearing down below, and that is essentially the thrust bearing pushing upward. So I think there's a total of 5 bearings, 2 right about here and here, 2 much further down on the opposite side but much lower, and then a third Teflon bearing for the upward force, which sits on this stainless shaft. So there's another Teflon bearing essentially holding this thing upward. So because of that sort of asymmetrical alignment of these Teflon surfaces, the bearing will seem to be really wobbly until you attach the elastic belt to the bearing system. So, and it scares people sometimes. They haven't seen that and they think there's something wrong with this particular platter, but there really isn't. And here I will demonstrate. If we stop this from playing and we push on the opposite side, you sort of get this sort of wobbly result from it, which seems like it's broken, but it's really not. It's the brilliance of its design. And as soon as this belt goes into place, then the whole thing becomes stable. Pretty neat, right? All right, a couple of things to watch out for. We've noticed one of the common symptoms of sort of aging on these turntables. So not aging, but one of the things we like to address is alignment of these 3 wooden plates. They seem to be attached to each other with some sort of elastic adhesive. So they weren't mechanically bonded. They were almost like chemically bonded. There's some sort of adhesive that holds them together, and that must be some sort of rubber-based or silicone-based adhesive. So if these tables are stored in an uneven surface, let's say you boxed it and left it up on an angle or on its side, they begin to drift, almost like tectonic plates. And as you can see, maybe on this one here, you can see that they're not perfectly aligned. And we've got a solution for that, which is pretty easy. We have a clamping system that we use to kind of even them out. And then you really don't have to worry about it again for a long time. As long as it sits in a flat surface and there's no forces taking it off kilter, it will tend to stay together. This one, for example, we haven't had to do anything to this one and it's perfectly aligned. Meanwhile, this table was almost half an inch off when we first got it. We've already done one set of alignments and then we'll do it again prior to cataloging it. Other things to note, I think the cover was optional because we once had one of these with all new packaging and it was a complete separate box with different part number. That's what the covers look like. They're a little bit taller in the back than they are in the front, and they have handles. And this is exactly the kind of cover we like to see on a turntable. We are not fans of hinged dust covers. They essentially, you've seen them before, you know, when you have back hinges on a dust cover and the dust cover is in its upward position, it really acts almost like a sail and it picks up all the vibration, all the energy in the room that's produced by the speakers and the movement of air and molecules. It's picked up by the dust cover and then transferred down to the turntable, which is about as bad as it gets. So if you've got a hinged dust cover, recommendation for best sound is to remove it when you're using it, when you're using the turntable, and then put it back when you're not. This solves the problem. It's not hinged. It kind of just sits on top of the turntable, and this is exactly what we like to do. Even on turntables like Lin LP12s, which we modify and sell a lot of, we almost never put the rear hinges in place unless a client specifically wants it. So why is this a good sounding turntable? Well, one of the important things in turntable design is to allow the cartridge to shine in all its glory. So to not get in the way of the performance of the cartridge. And the way you do that is by combating vibrations that come up through the table, through the air. And a lot of research has taught us over the years that a low mass tone arm is the way to go. And there's no better way to generate a low mass tone arm than to make it as simple as possible using the least amount of parts. This is a very small tube, with very lightweight materials. And the fact that it's not attached to any physical bearings means that it's able to eliminate any of the vibrations that are coming up through the turntable. So if you can imagine this sort of turntable plinth vibrating as it comes up through the tone arm, the only things that are in contact with the arm structure are the two tiny strings and the fluid itself. So there's very, very little opportunity while this is playing for those vibrations to make it into the tone arm, which then is transferred into the cartridge. So very ingenious and very simple. On conventional tone arms, you've got tons of bearings, you know, for the x-axis, for the y-axis. You know, we've seen tone arms with 3 or 4 sets of bearings that are coming in contact with the tone arm tube, and this is quite the opposite. So Well Tempered is actually still in business. They're producing modernized versions of these tables. We like this model in particular because its simplicity and because they're easy to work on. So as I mentioned, we'll fix up the plinths. This one in particular will probably get a respray. We like these to leave here looking almost new. So this turntable will get stripped and resprayed. This is mostly just oil fingerprints caused by the oil, which is a bummer. If you were adjusting this turntable, chances are you're gonna get some oil on your fingers and you're gonna transfer it to the matte surface. So perhaps we'll do this one in an interesting color that'll hide fingerprints a bit better. So we'll do all the fluids. We'll change the strings on the tone arm. We'll probably, at least on 1 or 2 of these, we'll rewire the tone arm with some really high-end Kimber or Cardis cables. And then we'll probably ship them with a syringe set. This is what comes from the factory, so you can fill the fluids, both the platter bearing and the viscous cup. Now these fluids are interesting to source. We found a great company that can supply the silicone oil in an incredibly high viscosity level, which is 100,000 CST, which is pretty interesting to work with. If we were to open this cap and start pouring, you'd probably have to sit here for almost a minute or 2 before the fluid even begins to come out of the device. That's why we like to use a syringe for fill up. It also makes it a little difficult to transport. These have to be shipped dry. So prior to shipping, we will empty and suction out all the fluids from these, from both the bearing and the tone arm, and then send these along their way with a brand new set of both lubricants. For cartridges, there are 2 things we like. We've liked any of the high-end Sumiko moving coil cartridges, the Blackbird, Starling. They tend to sound, these aluminum-bodied cartridges tend to sound really good on this turntable, as well as some of the vintage Benz Micro cartridges, like the LL4. I think I have one here to. This one in particular, it was sold very commonly with this turntable, and we're big fans of it. This is the Benz Micro out of Switzerland. All right, so here you have it, the Well Tempered turntable. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel. That'll keep us motivated to keep bringing you these videos. SkyFiaudio.com is our website where you can see hundreds and hundreds of vintage items from all walks of life, amplifiers, speakers, turntables. Please check out our website and leave any comments below. Thanks so much for watching.